want to start off today with answering Frank's question. Son of Man, what does it mean? So I looked through all of the verses that talk about Son of Man and Son of God. And what I found is that the Son of Man, when it's used, is referring to his humanity. And verses about the Son of Man, Luke 24:7, saying the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again. So that was the verse that you brought up. In Matthew it says, but I say unto you that Elias is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listened. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. So what you're going to find is in all of these Son of Man verses, it's talking about him and his body and what's going on there. Matthew 11:19, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and nothing spiritual about any of these things. And they say, behold, a gluttonous and a winebibber, and a friend of politicians, of publicans, and sinners, but wisdom is justified of her children. Matthew 26:64, Jesus said unto him, thou hast said, nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter ye shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power, and coming in the clouds of heaven, because you're going to see his body. And then in Daniel 7:13 and 14, it says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, because he's actually seeing him in his bodily form. Came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days and brought him near before him. So that was another one of those Son of Man. Philippians 2:6-8, who being in the form of God, right, now that's the spirituality side, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. So, and being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself, became obedient unto death, even death on the cross. So again, talking about his humanity. And he became the Son of Man to show man he was human as well as God. So there were a lot more verses of Son of Man than I thought there were. And that was only a few. There was probably another 10.
That's good.
And
I understand that.
and then the last one I have is in Hebrews 2:6-10. But one in a certain place testified, saying, what is man that thou art mindful of him, or the Son of Man that thou visited him? So, and then it talks about Jesus, that thou madest a little lower than the angels, yet crowned him with glory and honor, and did set him over the works of thy hands. And so they put all of these things in there where they would show that Jesus was a man as well as God. So I wanted to make sure I looked that one up for you. And today is October. I date all these and put them in my other folder. All right. So let's move back into where we left off. And I have a lot. Hold on for a second. In Daniel, part 2b. So first we'll start off with in Daniel 8, we're talking about the statue, right? In Daniel chapter 2, in the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, right? And he says that in this statue, he starts talking about the different parts of the statue. In Daniel 8, he further clarifies the events that were seen, and it's actually a parallel verse. Also, the interesting thing is I believe that in that parallel verse, that one of them, either 2 was written in Hebrew and 8 was written in Aramaic, or the other way around. And what that did was that gave it credence to both the Jews. It was pertinent to the Jews, it was written in Hebrew. It was also pertinent to the other people that were there, those people of the day, because it was written in their language as well. So now in Daniel 8, it says, and he said, behold, I will make thee known what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. And then he starts talking about,
Chapter 8?
yeah, Daniel chapter 8. It's a continuation of Daniel chapter 2.
Yeah, what verse?
8:19.
Oh, you didn't say that.
19 through 22.
Right, got it.
So then he further describes, and by the way, so the first dream that he had was the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and Daniel interpreted. He didn't really have a dream, Daniel. He just was given the interpretation by God. But in Daniel 8, it starts off in, let me pull up my Bible because I don't have that open. It talks about in Daniel 8, I believe in verse 1, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar, I'm sorry, I'm 1, I'm under 8. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel. So Daniel had his own dream after he gave the interpretation. And what it was, and we'll get to it further when we get into chapter 8, even though it's a parallel passage to what was there. And what happened was, he gives further clarification on the statue. So remember I said there are the first 4 kingdoms, we know what they are. Well, this one then elaborates even further. And he said, behold, I will make thee known what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at that time appointed the end shall be. In verse 20, the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of the Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between its eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So Daniel saw in his own dream that further clarified the vision that God gave him in chapter 2 of the first 4 parts of that statue. The head, which was Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, and then after Nebuchadnezzar, the Medes and the Persians came in and they took over, and that's what this one's talking about, and God gave them that, and after that, Greece came in, and they subdued the world and took over. Now, they didn't go any further here. They didn't go into the 4th one, which is the one which is made of the feet made of iron and clay. Okay? So, one thing that I did want to clarify, for some reason, hold on. The rest of, okay, good, here it is. Because see, the rest of my notes didn't download from home, but they did, they're all here. Last week, we talked about the rock, and I wanted to clarify what the rock was. So, it says in Daniel, we're going to go back to 2 now, because that's where we left off. Now, a lot of times you'll find that when you're reading the books of the Bible, of course the books themselves are not in chronological order. I remember my first time reading through the Bible when I got to Samuel, then I got to 1st and 2nd Kings, and I'm like, wait a minute, he died already. Oh wait, this goes back, and some of the books overlap, time-wise and things like that. They're definitely not in chronological order. The chronological order is in Genesis all the way to the end, and then after Genesis, then Exodus takes over from there. But once you get past Exodus, then things are not in chronological order after that. So neither is this. So that's why we jumped ahead to verse 8, or chapter 8, because chapter 8 gave us more of what was going on in chapter 2. So now we go back to chapter 2. And it says in Daniel 2, starting in 44, I'll read 44 and 45, and it says, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all the kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Verse 45, for as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass thereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. So what is that rock that was hewn out of, these are not, even my notes are not 2, 34 and 35, we'll see the rock. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them into pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, the gold, broken into pieces, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So what is the rock? The rock is the kingdom of God. Okay? And whereas there were rulers and kingdoms and all that kind of stuff that was set up, all the way up until the time that Jesus came, those kingdoms then were abolished, and there was no more one world kingdom after that. So it's a spiritual kingdom, and it's talking about salvation. That salvation will be offered to all mankind everywhere in the world, which made it vastly different than the other religions of the day, the small r religions, and Judaism, which was pretty much anyone could have converted and become part of the nation of Israel. They were still outsiders. When Christianity came about, that all ended, and anyone can become a Christian. It doesn't matter your race, your color, your religion. None of that matters. Anyone can get saved, and they all get saved the same way. So that's what that rock was talking about. And the reference for that in the New Testament is John 3:3, where it says, Jesus answered and said to him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. That's the same kingdom of God that was talked about in Daniel. So I wanted to clarify the rock because that was the next part that we got to. But, Antoinette, you had a question. And your question was about the revived Roman Empire. So I was mentioning to Fran when we first got here. So the last part of that statute, we know the first 4 because that's all history. It's all taking place, and it's pretty much ended around 70 AD. Now, I got my office partially cleaned out, and I can get almost to my bookcase, so I can get my History of the World books from Dr. David Cloud. But before that happens, I wanted to go through what I'm seeing in here. And apparently there's 2 schools of thought. Some of it is my own thinking that doesn't jive with some of the things that other people are talking about. And it all depends on one thing. If the reference to the feet and the toes of clay and iron refer to a futuristic event, then they mean something totally different. But if they refer to something that already took place, then it means something completely different as well. Now, there's a lot of talk that they're referring to futuristic events, and why do they say that? So they're talking about futuristic events because they're talking about the same 10 horns and 10 toes that's talked about in Revelation. And they're trying to say that the 2 things can be mixed, but they'll never really mix. But what makes more sense is that it's not a futuristic thing, that we'll see more of the future at the end of Daniel than we see right now. Now, this is mostly speculation on not only my part, but the people who have written about it. And I've come up with my own conclusion. Then I look to see what everybody else was saying, and I'm seeing that it's kind of split. So, one of the interpretations is, mine is, I put that down first. I'm starting to believe this is a past nation as it fits with the mix of iron and clay and the feet of the statue. Rome was a mix of citizens and slaves, but it was about 50-50, so there was no national loyalty, and made the empire easily overtaken. There was also that even though Rome had their own army, Rome had a lot of mercenaries. They had a lot of outside people that came in for their defense. Who does that today? Russia. Okay? And what happens when you have a mercenary? Sometimes they turn on you, like the Wagner group turned on Putin, and they said, we're going to come get you. And next thing you know, he said, well, I got to go fly somewhere. And his plane got shot down. Oh, we don't know what happened. Sure you do. They couldn't make him jump out a window because he lived on the ground floor, so they shot his plane down. But either way, if you're a Russian citizen, you go against Putin, you end up crashing into the ground very hard. Anyway, with that type of thing going on, there's no national loyalty. And that could have contributed to the fall of Rome. That the feet and toes of clay and iron, no matter how much you mix those two substances together, they will never stick. And that's what they all do agree that that's what they're talking about, that there'll be no cohesion amongst whatever this is, whether it's a future nation or whether it's something that took place at the fall of the Roman Empire. Now we can see how the Roman Empire fell very easily. But then we get into a little bit more speculation, which I'm not sold on. One common interpretation is that the last kingdom of iron is the Holy Roman Empire, which is currently experiencing its final resurrection as the European Union. Now, I was talking to Matt about this, and I'm like, no, I don't see that at all.
I think that's what Dexter used to say.
He may have, and the next time I get to talk to him, maybe I'll talk to him a little bit about that. I don't see a lot of correlation without a lot of speculation that just, you gotta add things into it. You gotta add a lot of things into it. And Daniel's 10 toes was corresponding to the Revelation's 10 kings, representing 10 European nations that would unite to form the beast and support the Antichrist. So what they're taking some prophecy and saying maybe we can fit that in here, and then well there's stuff missing here, but we'll make up stuff, and then the rest of it fits in here. Like you're saying, the 10 kings representing 10 European nations. How do we know that? Why would we even think that it would be European nations? You know, what is the impetus for that? Now, there are a lot of very interesting articles that I put down there. Currently, we don't know who these 10 kings could be, or who these 10 nations are. We have no clue. So, but what I did find is there's a term called the Holy Roman Empire, and they tried to revive that, but that was in 500 AD, and during Napoleon's time, I guess it was 500, it might have been 500 or 600, and during that time, it was complete utter failure. And they tried to revive it, and it crashed and burned, never to be revived again. So, I don't see why adding 2,000 years to that would have made it something that could have come back to life. But this part of history is not my strong suit, so I don't know. I'm still not sold on it yet. So it goes on. Speculation about the exact nature of the revived Roman Empire can be interesting. We must remember, and this time I put down a reference to this one. We must remember to keep the right perspective. Our primary focus as Christians is supposed to be spreading the gospel, not trying to identify the Antichrist, and that's true. In particular, we should realize that what was written about the revived Roman Empire in the Bible is not very extensive, and we can't go beyond what's written, and I tend to agree with that. And we know that the Antichrist is coming, and we know he will have some connection to the ancient Roman Empire. Now, I don't know why he said that. I don't know how he can even allude to that, but that's what they say. Possibly through ancestry, geography, or the structure of his government. Now that one I can go with. I can go with the structure of government because there are things in our government that have been structured after the Roman Empire. And let's see, we can read the signs of the times in Matthew 6:3, but we don't know enough to be dogmatic in the details. And that was from GotQuestions.org. So I was glad to see that somebody also put that down. And again, it's all speculation. We can't know. Remember I said there are things we can know for sure, things we'll never know, and then there's things we can speculate about. This falls right rock solid into that speculation category. Is it important in the overall scheme of things? I don't really think so, because first of all, it doesn't have a lot to do with the signs of the times of what's going to happen before the tribulation, and we don't care what happens after the tribulation, because we're not going to be here. Okay? So we have to not only go back to history, but we have to go back to Jewish tradition of what's going to happen during the wedding feast of Christ, which is where it will be. So we don't care from the tribulation point forward. So what is the other sides? Well, there's going to be wars, rumors of wars. That has nothing to do with what nation. Nation's going to rise up against nation. We've been seeing that for 20 years, mostly due to the military-industrial complex. That should get us banned on Facebook, that term. And, you know, we're seeing these types of things where people are wielding power and starting wars because there's money in war. And I always used to say, how is there money in war? Government has to spend money. But the people who make all the stuff in war get rich. And that's where there's money in war. So it's not like you or me will benefit when someone's going to war. But somebody who owns stock in, Raytheon, they're going to benefit greatly because they make a lot of the weaponry that's used in war. So let's go back to this Holy Roman Empire, also known as the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation after 1512. Actually, that might have been, maybe I was wrong with 500, it might have been 1500. And it was in Central and Western Europe, usually headed by the Holy Roman Empire. It developed in the Middle Ages and lasted for almost 1,000 years until its dissolution in 1906 during the Napoleonic Wars. So I don't believe that there's any way you can say that the Roman Empire of old is going to revive itself. There may be pieces of stuff that might revive itself. And then I put down a comment from a guy named Ray Grant, I have no idea who he is. He commented on May 9th, 2023, and it says, Roman history has shown that its society and military were comprised of so many different providential people, groups, that there was no national cohesiveness. Now here's the saying, migration without assimilation leads to disintegration. And that's what happened to the Roman Empire, and what's happening today in our country. The exact same thing. So even when we get into a book like Daniel, we think we can escape the similarities of, as Carissa asked one day, why do we have to learn history? Because the stupid stuff that people did in the past are the same stupid things stupid people are going to do today. What's that?
What's that saying called?
Immigration without assimilation leads to disintegration. And the foreign mercenary legions stopped defending Rome from the barbarians. It wasn't their fight. So when they start seeing that they're losing their people due to the ruthless people that they're fighting, they're going to just say, you know what, it's not worth it. It doesn't matter how much it pays. Add to that the hundreds of thousands of slaves that are in Rome, and you have the clay mixed with iron. So I really think, if I had to guess, speculation on my part, this is something that took place in the past and has no bearing on the future. And when I take a look at it, as I look forward into Daniel, because I just read, I finished reading the book again for the second or third time today. When I finish reading the book, it becomes quite evident when he's talking about the future, because he's talking about the 70 weeks, and he even spells it out in days, how many days that is. And that's pure future events, that there's no ambiguity, that we know that Christ's birth happened in the 69th week of Daniel, and there are 7 years left of the 70 weeks, each week referring to 7 years. And we know that that's futuristic. So for anyone to want to speculate and say, why would he throw something in the middle of this dream, talking about something that in Daniel's day, he talks about it, he said these things will take place in the future of Daniel. And we did see, when we get into chapter 3, we see immediately that the second part of that statue, the head of gold, gone. The second part of the statue takes over. That was in the future. Nebuchadnezzar had been dead, long gone, and his grandson was kind of running the country, so to speak. And he had the same bad habits that his grandfather had, and that was pride. And we'll start to see that show up. So all of these things that God spoke to Daniel about to tell people what was going on, or when it came to the things in his vision that he saw, and by the way, it said trouble great when he saw these things. So I can't imagine. You ever have a really, really bad dream? Well, Daniel, it wasn't a dream, it was a vision, and it was scary. And it was so scary, so that David's countenance changed so scared he got sick, and for about a week. And then after, I don't know if it was a week or 3 weeks, just read it today, but I didn't take notes on the stuff I read today. He got so sick, but then when he got better, he said, then I went back about doing the king's visits. But how scared must your vision be when you see these things that you actually get sick over it? And he says his strength left him, that he didn't have any strength or even any breath. And if it weren't for, who was his buddy in this one? Michael, the archangel. And he came and put his hand on Daniel and he revived him, he gave him strength. And it talks about him throughout the book during these visions that he had. And God allowed him to ask questions. But we do get in chapter, it's either 9 or 10, right at 11, where he said, these things seal up in the book. And normally when that says seal it up, it means no one's going to be able to read it. That includes us. So I believe that there might have been more to Daniel that we're not allowed to see. And God did not include it in the canon scripture because he said this stuff is not for you guys. So it's been very interesting to see the things that he was actually able to see. Because in all of the visions he had, he said when he got up and I fell to my face, and I was like sleeping, like on the floor, my face to the ground, and then they put their hand upon me and raised me up, and I asked, what does this mean? And all but one, he told them what it meant, except the last time he said, nope, seal these. He didn't say he didn't tell them. He just said, seal these things up. I believe he did tell them. I think he told Daniel and said, don't write it down or whatever, but I'll show you what's going to happen. And then that's my speculation of what happened. When you read it, if you really get into the story, it looks like the angel did tell him what's going to happen and said, but don't tell anybody. That's not for anybody to know. It's just for you because you were so upset about your vision that you had. And, you know, it goes along with all of these people who say they died. I saw this light. There is no reference to ever seeing light. When the life is scared out of you and you're like practically on your deathbed, you can't talk about what you see. You have no strength in you whatsoever to talk about anything that you've seen. And I think that that's important to realize that these people who say they've had an out-of-body or whatever experience, I saw myself hovering over my body. Listen, I'll say one thing. When you die, it's not about you. It's about God, and especially those that are saved. You know, there were some songs by Twyla Paris, I think it is, where she has this one song. It just annoys me because it says when we got to heaven, somebody came up and said thank you for giving to the Lord.
That was Ray something, I believe, or
yeah, but she sang it too.
oh, did she?
Yeah. And she said, thank you for giving to the Lord. And then another person came up to me and thanked me. Then another person. Next thing you know, there's this whole line of people thanking me. It's not about you in heaven. It's about God. And that's part of the problem with contemporary Christian music today, is that they mess up doctrine so bad. It's not about us when we get to heaven. You know, it's about God. So, this was the end, probably the end of chapter 2. So, next week, we'll get into chapter 3, and chapter 3 is about the fiery furnace. Now, I don't know if we'll get up to the furnace, because as you can see, there's a lot of morsels of things that we can pick out in these stories. But the one thing that really, really stood out in the book of Daniel so far, having read through it all and seeing what God did, you know how God said that David, his term from God was a man after God's own heart, right? So whenever you think of King David, you think he was the man after God's own heart. You know what Daniel's was? You're the favored one. He says it on multiple occasions that you are the one who found favor in God's sight. So Daniel must have really, and it says why? It says because you purposed in your heart that you would always serve the Lord. Now, it's a paraphrase. We'll get to it when we see it. We'll see what he said, but Daniel really, probably one of the most godly men to ever walk the face of the earth, with the exception of maybe Job. But I think there's a lot about Daniel that God will both know about when we get to heaven that we don't know about now. Daniel never gave God any lip. Never. Job did. But Job repented for the lip he gave him. You know? Job actually boasted in his righteousness. The only other time I've seen that is King David did too. But King David spent so much time asking the Lord to forgive him for the things that he did. Oh, that was another thing that was very interesting about Daniel. One of the visions that came to Daniel was when he gave his, when he called them his daily revelations before God. And he says, as I sat back, and I believe it's chapter 11, the whole first, 30 verses is him asking forgiveness for him and the nation, saying, we have sinned against you. And as soon as he was done praying that, Michael came in and said, by the way, here, I got something I want to show you. And I don't think that's a coincidence that happened that way. I think that God honored his prayers. And when we look at the book of Job, how Job was, falling on his righteousness, and maybe justly so. Maybe Job did not have any really overt sins, but God said to him, where were you when I created the earth? Where were you when I put Leviathan in the ocean? Where were you when I set all the planets in their orbits? Where were you? So you really don't have any place to talk. You're not like me. And what did Job do? Immediately he repented for that attitude that he had. So, but it doesn't show that attitude, that there was no sense of pride in Daniel whatsoever. So we get to see.
I didn't know that Job had an attitude. I thought he
just thought that
just asking God why.
Well,
he was
toward the end, when this is how I'll paraphrase it. When God gave it to his three friends, and God really gave it to his three friends, Job was like, yeah, and that goes double for me. And then God said, wait a minute, I got a bone to pick with you too. And he's like, me? So that's the only kind of lip that he gave him. He was almost like, yeah, you three thought you had something, and God gave
you. Tell me that I was in sin.
Yeah, you had all your reasons of why you thought this was happening, but God knew why it was happening. And, and it wasn't because I did anything wrong. I was perfect before God. I was righteous. I never once cursed God. I never once did anything wrong. And God said, yeah, well, I do have a bone to pick with you. But and as soon as God pointed it out to Job, he immediately repented. And I believe that's the second or the last chapter in the book of Job. We can do Job one of these days. It's I would call it an intellectual book, because you have all these guys with their pie in the sky nonsense about, search your life, dig deep, you'll find something in there. Everything in life is caused by God punishing you and whatever. And then that definitely wasn't the case when it came to Job. We know, because we're outside of that book, we can see that God had a plan in Job's life, that he wanted to show Satan that there are some people, very few. And listen, in the Word of God, I only see two of them. I only see Job and Daniel, who almost nothing was ever written bad.
Well, then Satan said the only reason he's so faithful to you is because of everything you've given him. Take it all away, and he would curse you, but he never cursed God.
No, he didn't. That he never did. He didn't, but he did rely a little bit on his. He kind of had a woe is me attitude, like, oh, why is all this happening to me?
Right.
A little bit of that, but hey, who wouldn't?
I don't. Better if I was never born.
Yep. So, well, I hope you're learning stuff about Daniel. We're only up to chapter 3, but it's been a fun study for me, and I'm starting to segue into Revelation, where those two cross, and that'll cross toward the end, which we probably won't get to the end of Daniel until after the new year. So, but it's okay, because I got time. Once you don't get raptured, I got time. And you know what? If we do get raptured, I don't have to worry, because then we'll know the whole book anyway.
That's it. We can only